Good morning, everybody. My name is Suzanne from Beck Tech's marketing department, and I want to welcome everyone and thank you for attending today's webinar. Doug Maiden, i.e. Yoda, is going to present how you can use a unit price sandbox database. Before passing it over to Doug, I'd like to remind everyone that registration for this year's Pre-Con World is now open on our website. You can buy your ticket on the events section of the website. And while you're there, be sure to register for our next webinar on July 19th, where we will be talking about 3 different approaches to estimating general conditions. If you have any questions during today's webinar, throw them in the question box in GoToWebinar, and we will do our best to answer them at the end of the presentation. Okay, Doug, take it away.
Thank you, Suzanne. There we go. Now I have my screen shared. I thank all of you for attending today's webinar. This webinar is for those that have access to Destiny Data Manager and that they can curate their unit price database. And so not everyone, this may not impact everyone as far as, say, utilizing the sandbox, but it does impact all of your users when it comes to receiving updates, because what you will use the sandbox for is the potential next generation of your unit price database where you're incubating ideas, and then when it makes sense, the timing is appropriate, you can publish from the sandbox into production. So on my screen, you can see Destiny Data Manager, and traditionally for those that do have this access right, you will then have 2 tiles. One is your company's production cost database and also your company's sandbox database. Now, as I select on the tile for the sandbox database, I'm going to get the connection and it'll refresh so that it populates Destiny Data Manager with the sandbox data. I also want to draw your attention to the bottom right corner, just above the clock. There is a little hard drive icon that indicates that I am currently in the sandbox. Now, also, all of you that have access to the sandbox will see that in the connection profile list back in Destiny Estimator. So as I go to home and then over to the ribbon, down in my connect databases, I have production, which everyone would have. And of course, I have sandbox, which is exclusive to those that have read-write access. Now, purpose of the sandbox, again, is to stay kind of off the main line. Don't disrupt your practitioners that are using the database on a day-by-day basis. You're out in front of them, cultivating the information that is necessary for some sort of future projects, right? It could be unit price updates. It could also be additional assemblies or custom tuning and tweaking that you would like to make your end users more proficient in the consumption of Destiny Estimator. As I go into the cost database inside of Destiny Estimator, notice how, again, I can take a look at line items or I can look at assemblies. If I was to go down into line items and look at, say, partitions, by selecting on the Gypboard partition, you'll notice at the moment that my quantity is 0, my unit prices are 0. And that is most likely or most common in really first implementations and just standing up your unit price database. But again, you can successfully use the sandbox as a way to cultivate these ideas, test them, and then get ready to publish them. So let me demonstrate that. Back in Destiny Data Manager, I'm going to navigate to the estimator mode, and then I'll navigate over to my line items tab. Now, once in the line items tab, let me go find that partition line item that I saw before, which was my Gypboard partition. Here I see unit prices, all 0, and then say, for example, formulas. Well, if I want to help our end users start to be able to consume and use, say, automatic pricing, maybe we can go ahead and have some formulas like, say, length times height, and that is something that I now have in this line items formula in Destiny Data Manager. Now, back over in Destiny Estimator, In order to see that change inside of the Sandbox, you need to navigate to the Home tab and then connect to the Sandbox again. As I refresh that connection, I do want to point out that same icon in the bottom right corner. You can hover over it, and I'm currently connected to the Sandbox database. As I go down to my Chipboard partition, I have a change that has occurred. You'll notice I now have prompts for length and I have prompts for height. Behind the scenes, if I look at the f of x, what I did a moment ago in my Sandbox has now been successfully published here in the formula. And going forward, then, if I was to want to use some 2D, let's just say I was going to draw a line. So maybe this is going to be 100 by 10. I'm just going to manually do this just for testing purposes. Now I have the value. I can go ahead and add it to my estimate. So that's a good example of being able to develop the next generation of your unit price database so that it is more convenient for end users. Now, I'm going to jump back over to Data Manager for just a moment and taking a look at the cost button. You can see all of my costs are currently 0. Well, let's go ahead and have this as an opportunity to go ahead and update to $7.25 for the sub cost. Now, as I've made that change, what you'll see is it's currently not that inside of DESTINI Estimator until I refresh and say, hey, I want to recall what's in the Sandbox. So as I go to connect to the database, select on the Sandbox database, now I can come back down to my Chipboard wall, and not only have I made a change to say the length and the height, or I introduced that before, I now have the sub cost. One other thing to be aware of here is if you are making updates in your unit price database, users can refresh that as well by going over to the Home tab and then selecting on Update Cost. Now, this is important. The only impact that Update Cost has is to 5 cost categories: labor, material, equipment, sub, and other. If I want to do that, I can go ahead and select yes, and immediately that $7.25 has been added or updated in this particular estimate. A couple of side notes on this is it is an intentional action to say, I want to update from the database to this current estimate. There's also a requirement that the item number and the description have to be identical to what is in the unit price database in order to have that successful update. I'd also like to draw your attention to assemblies. A lot of folks use assemblies, and if you are modifying or updating assemblies or introducing new assemblies, that is a really good reason to use the Sandbox because you can test those ideas before putting them into production. So if I was to go down to C and then into C10 interiors and then finally the third down, you'll notice that uniformat is 2 levels deep, but not the third one. If I go back to DESTINI Data Manager and then over to my Assemblies tab and then into my interior partitions, I can go over to the WBS Properties button and set the third value for uniformat, which might be, say, C1010 partitions. Clicking anywhere else, that automatically applies the update and the change. And an important note here as well is any change that you make to your Sandbox database is instantaneous. There are no undos. And that is really a good reason to also use the Sandbox, is you have that ability. It's kind of your safety net to be able to do all of the updates, then again, vet and test those directly in DESTINI Estimator so that you can see the experience for the end user. Back over in the Home tab, I'll go ahead and refresh that database connection to the Sandbox this final time. And then as I navigate down through C, C10 to C1010 partitions, you can see a successful update. I'm going to recap now on what are the standard operating procedures or best practices that are appropriate for you here. The Sandbox is your next potential unit cost database for your end users to consume and use. use that sandbox effectively so that you can incubate and test the ideas before simply just letting them out into the wild in production. Utilizing DESTINI Estimator, you can actually certify the sandbox and know what that end user experience will be. And then if you fat fingered something, made some adjustments that were just not palatable, you can always reach out to Beck Technology, to the support team. Mo and his team can always recall a previous iteration of your sandbox because we back up nightly. They can restore that, and then you can continue on cultivating and testing and vetting the project or testing the database until it's ready for production. Another thing to be thoughtful and kind to your end users is to notify them that an update is pending or about to take place and when it will be available to them, and potentially also consider putting some sort of release notes together as to what are the changes. Is it maybe an annual unit price update change where they might want to also consider using the update cost, or maybe it's some new assemblies. And then finally, really important here is do the publishing after hours or on the weekends so that you're not disrupting your production teams. One final note is you do have to notify Mo and his team to unlock the production database to receive those published changes. I will go back to Data Manager for just a moment to highlight one thing, which is to publish the sandbox. That is in the Data Manager mode underneath the ribbon, which is Publish Database. I won't do this now because it takes about 5 minutes, but I can select on the source, which would traditionally always be the sandbox, and that the target is going to be production. Once I've set that, select the Publish button, and in about 5 minutes, you will see a successful update. Now, the only other thing to be aware of is when you do a publish, the icon in the bottom right-hand corner is going to say in production that it is a sandbox. And what I would encourage all of you to do is to reach out to Mo and the team and say, please update to your company's name and production so that on, say, Monday or the next day after hours, all of your users are able to connect to the published production database. Suzanne, do we have any questions in the webinar?
Yeah, there's one question. How often do you recommend publishing from Sandbox to production?
That's a good question. I think it is on a case-by-case basis. Some folks will possibly update, say, semi-annually or annually their unit price databases, and then twice a year you might do that. If you are more active in developing out, say, assemblies or modifying adjusting assemblies, I would say after you've got a couple of assemblies that have been performing the way you expect them to and you're happy with the output, then of course you can publish that as well. So I would just say that it really just varies depending upon how much time you're able to dedicate to the maintenance of your cost database.
Cool. Good advice, Doug. Thank you so much. That's all the questions we have, and we're about up on time. So I hope everybody attending found this webinar helpful. And if you have any more questions, please reach out to us, and we'll see you next month. Bye-bye.